Alright, hello, and welcome to my third tank review. In this tank review, I'm going to be talking about the VK7501K. Um, Quite a rare tank, but not in terms of how you can acquire it. This tank is actually quite, I'd say, easy to acquire. So it's a tier 8 premium heavy tank, German. And you sadly can't acquire it. It's not a common tier 8 premium, I would say, because you can't buy it in the tech tree. That's what I would consider like a common premium tank. But it's not exactly a rare premium tank. They give it away in giveaways. They let you trade it in trade-in events. You can trade in other tanks for this one. They sell in the premium shop quite regularly, right? Stuff like that. I was able to get mine by during a trade-in event. I traded in another tank for it, and so it cost me like the majority of a gold of a tank. Those trading events are like a little bit of a scam, but if it's you're using it to get a tank that you can't normally buy for gold, it's kind of a good deal. Because you can get a tank without having to spend money, right? You can get it completely for free. So, the reason I would say this tank is kind of rare is because it's not really talked about very much. Weirdly enough, it's quite an old tank, but it's not talked about super regularly. It's actually just kind of, it's not like super old, but it's not new either. But you don't see these too often. I've started seeing a bit more of them recently, actually, but a little bit less so somewhat recently. So I'll just flash my service record here. You can see I have almost 10,000 battles, 54% win rate. My average stats are like a little low because when I first started playing, I played a lot of low tiers, but stop that these days. But you can see my average stats for this tank. So 242 battles. I played this quite a lot because I was doing missions with it. Missions in the second campaign, so missions that required me to play a German tank. But I was able to get a 59% win rate, which is quite above average for this tank because most people seem to play it quite badly or just not do very well in it. And I am surprised by that, but also not surprised, and I'll explain why. 1,000 average experience. This was with the premium account, so that will be boosted up, but I was averaging 1,800 damage per game. That's not the highest. It's actually quite low. For like average damage and tier 8 premiums. That's not like a good amount in my opinion. I usually like to get like around 2,000, but there's a reason for it. This tank isn't a damage dealer. It does do some good damage, but it does it in a different way, right? It's not high damage totals. It's more about impactful damage, but I'll explain that. So it's not a very common tank, but it's not particularly easy to get your hands on. Does that mean it's good? Not exactly. I wouldn't say this tank is super competitive. I wouldn't say it's a super good tank. I would say this is a B tier tank. If I had to just give it a tier and you wanted to just hear a tier number and run away, then B tier is probably what I'd say. Sadly, it's not exactly the most competitive. It's not like something like your Renegade. It's not flexible. It's not adaptable. Right? You're not going to be always carrying your games in this thing. That's for sure. You can carry some games in it, but you need the right situation, right? And you also need you need the right situation, right? But it can do some work, and I'll explain how exactly. First of all, I wanted to go into this, and can I? What the fuck? Why is this not working? Oh, it's in camouflage. I want to take this camouflage off, because while I do use this camouflage, this tank actually comes with, like, a little bit of a 3D style, weirdly enough. This isn't something that I've purchased. This comes with the tank. You get a little sign on the back. I'm pretty sure it says to Berlin, but I could be wrong. You get, like, some bags over the side. You get a nice wrap over the gun. You get some buckets. It's quite a nice-looking tank. It looks very detailed. It's got a little bit of personality to it. It's not, like, super boring. So I do really like that, and it was something that I quite like about this tank. So because I do actually own this one, I will go over the field mods. A lot of my previous reviews, I haven't gone over the field mods, and also they've been a little bit lengthy. But straight into it, what is this tank all about, right? We've gotten over, how it looks. You've seen my stats. You know that I've done some good work with this tank. I at least know a little bit what I'm talking about. So what is this tank all about? Side scraping. That's literally the one thing that it is made for. You side scrape with this thing. It is brutally armored when you side scrape, Except it's not, and that's kind of the main reason why this tank isn't as good as it might seem. So, first of all, let's just go straight into the statistics, right? I think we've talked about just the general overview. It's not exactly the most competitive tank, but it can do some work, right? I'd say B tier is where it's sit, right? S tier being the overpowered, super competitive premiums, A tier being the very consistent, really good ones, and B tier being they're good, but you're not gonna want to play them over something in A tier. You know what I mean? In the right situation, they can be A tier, right? But if in the wrong situation, they're not quite A tier, right? Not quite as good. So bring up Tanks GG here, super useful website. If you don't know it, you need to know it. So first of all, starting off, DPM is tragic for tier 8 heavy. You're gonna notice this. It's at one of the lowest DPMs at tier 8. And now you might think, okay, well, throw this thing out the window. It's terrible. That's wrong. And I'll explain something to you that not a lot of people seem to understand. Is that um, DPM is only useful if you're continually firing, right? You need to fire on reload to get the most out of your DPM. Every second, every half a second that you're not using your DPM, right? And you have a shell loaded. So, like, think about it. Every half a second in a heavy brawl that you're not using your shell, your DPM is lowering, right? Every millisecond that you're not using that shell while you're loaded, your DPM is going down. It's going down. It's going down. It's going down to a point where you're going to reach other tanks that have lower DPM than you. And you guys are going to have equal DPM all of a sudden. Because while you reload in 10 seconds, they reload in 12 seconds, but they're just going to hide around the corner until they're loaded. And so your DPM is the same, right? That's the thing, right? If somebody all-ins you in this tank, you fucking notice because it sucks. If your armor doesn't work, you can't win. Like, you just can't, right? People out DPM you. The only thing you can hope for is that an ally helps you and you drop these big alpha bombs on them. 490 is amazing alpha damage. It's some of the highest alpha damage for a heavy tank at tier 8. Obviously, you're no Skoda T56. You're not dropping two 490 damage shells or anything, but you can drop 490 damage shells on your 17-second reload. But the thing is that you're a side scraper. You pick when you want to take that fight. You pick when you want to peek. So you hide, you hide, you hide, you reload. Boom, you peek out, 490 damage. You hide, you hide, you hide, you reload. You peek out, 490 damage. And that DPM doesn't seem so bad anymore. But the 490 alpha damage feels really nice. It feels so nice to drop this alpha damage on people. It makes the tank feel really nice. The DPM, I honestly didn't notice it that much because a lot of the time, you're the one controlling the engagement just because you have so much health points and so much armor in this thing, right? People don't want to just frontally fight you. They don't want to all in you. So your DPM isn't the end all be all, but you do notice it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, you don't even notice it. Your DPM is low, and if somebody all ins you, it does suck, and you're gonna feel it. Especially if two targets all in you. If anybody knows that, like, knows the tank, they're gonna all in you, and it's gonna suck. But the thing is that people don't want to get hit by you. You are scary, and that's one thing I really enjoyed in this tank. You are a scary tank. People do not want to fight you. People do not want to get hit by you, and that 490 damage scares off a lot of people. Next, we got the penetration. 226 millimeters. It's pretty good for a standard round. It feels really nice to use 226 millimeters. You can aim at weak points and go through really reliably if you hit them, that is. And 226 is nice. It's a nice, good round, right? It's nothing like crazy break the bank, but it's a good round. Sadly, your premium rounds, 260, is kind of underwhelming because you're going to be going up against a lot of super heavies a lot of the time in this tank. You want to fight other heavies because you're going to side scrape. You're going to go to cities. You're going to go to towns. You're going to go to corners, and you're going to fight other heavies. And when you need to fight things that are higher tier than you, man, this tank sucks because they hit just as hard as you. They have enough penetration to fucking butter you, and because I'll show the weak points in a second, and you don't really have the pen to just butter them. So you kind of get pushed aside, and you end up having to be a support tank. This tank does not work well as a support tank because this is a big, chunky tank. It's chunky, it's slow, it's rear mounted. You are the front line. You're the tank that the support tanks support, right? You are the main heavy. So this thing does not play nice with others on a corner. It wants the corner for itself, and if there's multiple teammates on the corner, it feels like shit because you can't side scrape properly and people just get in the way. But I'm getting a little bit too hard ahead of myself. In terms of shell velocity, I'll just go over that now because I'm talking about the premium rounds. The normal rounds have 920 shell velocity. It's not great. You're going to notice it if you're shooting at things at distance, but it's not terrible. It's not like disgusting, right? So it's okay. You might want to load a premium shell. 1,100 shell velocity is not too bad, right? Like you're going to be okay. You can use those to snipe if you really want to for the extra shell velocity, and it'll be a decently fast shell. Nothing crazy, but nothing slow. For an APCR round, I mean that's pretty good shell velocity. Don't get me wrong, but for an APCR round, that's kind of slow. Next, we're gonna go to HE. HE shell velocity 920, pretty good for an HE round. It's the same as your normal rounds, and they deal 630 damage. These are some big, chunky HE shells. And with 65 pen, I definitely found some scenarios where I could use these. Barasks, Scorpions, SU-130s, ELCs, right? Like, there is lots of opportunities to use these 65, like, pen. You can 100% dump 600 damage bombs on people. It's pretty fun. Definitely load a couple of these. And speaking of that, since we're on the subject, there is ammo capacity 40, quite high. It's quite high. I really never felt like, because you reload so slow and you're like, you deal so much damage, you can see potential damage with your normal rounds is 20,000, right? So you have enough ammo to split it up a little bit and load lots of other ammo. So it's nice to bring a couple HEs. Super nice. Next, obviously we talked about the reload time, quite long. I would have loved if this tank had heat, like 270 heat, maybe like 280 heat. Then this thing would have felt a little scary, right? Because when you do end up fighting those other heavies, you are able to at least do something to them. But 260, you have to aim for weak points against super heavies, and you basically have to load the gold to go through, like, not even super heavies, just any heavy at tier 9 or 10, you're going to need to load the gold, and even with gold, you're going to need to hit weak points, and then you're going to be kind of screwed, because go on to the next thing. Well, firstly, aim time. Aim time for such a big gun is not bad, actually. 2.59 is not bad for such a big gun. It's really not a big deal. And it doesn't feel terrible. But we'll go on to gun handling as a whole. Next, accuracy, 3.7. It's bad, but for such a big gun, again, it's not bad. And you'll see a trend when I'm talking about this tank, right? And the trend is that, yes, it's kind of a super heavy, and yes, it's got a really big gun, but it doesn't throw away other aspects of the tank as much as other super heavies or other big gun tanks do. It does fit into that role, and it's kind of forced into that role, but when it's outside that role, it's not a fish out of water. It still has aspects that hold it up, and you'll see what I mean with a lot of aspects throughout the tank. So next, gun handling. These things are fucking awful, but you don't move very fast, so it's not like the worst thing in the world, but it fucking sucks. You need vert stabs on this tank. I tried to run it without it. You need vert stabs, especially because you're going to take the aiming circle size. Your aiming speed is going to get even slower. You need vert stabs. You cannot run without them, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, that's all there is to say, basically. But with vert stabs, it really doesn't feel that bad. I really didn't feel the aim time and the accuracy. Like, I felt like the gun handled really well for something that shoots such big bombs of damage. But it does fucking suck sometimes when your shells just troll you out of nowhere. But I'll explain the way I've built this tank in a little bit, and you'll see that the shells don't troll you as much as you might think with 0.37 accuracy, right? We lower that accuracy quite considerably. And that's one thing that I mean. When you start kitting this tank out, all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is a super heavy that doesn't really sacrifice that much to be a super heavy with a big gun. And it's like, okay, well, now all of a sudden it's not a fish out of water. It's not unflexible. It's actually quite a flexible tank that can still do good work when you put it in the situation where it's meant for. It's not like it sacrifices too much in its main like situation to be more versatile to where it's not very good in that main situation. It's still really good and wins in that main situation, but is quite flexible outside of it as well. So that's kind of the thing. Damage versus modules, it was nice, but I didn't really notice it too much. Caliber, this is a big one. And this is something that really makes this tank good. And I'll actually need to bring up a separate tab here to really show you what I'm talking about. So if I go to a heavy tank that is quite popular in the meta right now, the BZ-176. If you look at this thing's model, right? You look at it from here, and we load HE, right? Because HE cannot overmatch, you can see that the BZ has 2 weak points on the top of its tank. There and there, right? And everybody knows those weak points are unrealistic to hit. They're fucking tiny, right? But if you load AP, all of a sudden the whole roof is green, right? But if I go to another tank, like an AMX-50, oh, the whole roof's pink. This is because of the overmatch rule. If you don't know the overmatch rule, if a gun caliber is 3 times the size of whatever plate it is hitting, it will automatically go through as long as you're shooting AP or APCR. So this is a 41 millimeter plate, which means that if you have a 123 or bigger gun, it will automatically go through, which means that when you put this up against the VK, just all the way at the bottom, boom. Now the BZ has an entirely overmatchable roof, and this is quite easy to hit. This is quite easy to hit. And there's other tanks like this too. If I go to tier 8 heavies, even the, actually no, tier 7 heavies, right? Everybody knows the, actually, I'll use the tier 9 tank destroyer, right? The T30, its whole roof. These are 38 millimeter plates right here. You can just fucking overmatch the roof of the T30, right? You can just shoot straight through the roof. So this thing that's supposed to have this god turret, all of a sudden, yeah, not so godly when you can just go through the roof of the turret with your normal rounds. But another thing is, I mean, like an IS-3, I mean, that doesn't need a big gun to go through. But if you know your plates in this tank, you can do work. Because it, like, you can just overmatch shit. And that's one nice thing about big caliber guns, is that you don't need to be hyper accurate, because sometimes there's these big weak points you can hit. You can hit under flaps, you can hit engine decks, you can hit like turret rings. There's lots of things you can hit sometimes if you know what you're shooting at. And that's the thing. I think that big caliber guns always have a higher skill ceiling than people realize, because if you know your plates and you know how big these are, then you can do good work. This actually has, if I go in here, by stat, shell caliber, tier 8, get rid of SPGs. Let's just go for heavies. It does have the 3rd biggest gun. Well, 4th, right? We got the BZ-176, of course. Skoda T56, of course. And the OHO, which is kind of bad. And then you have all the VKs and this VK. But this thing kind of counters itself, because it has an overmatchable roof. And I'll show that in the armor layout in a second. Next, shell cost. While we're on shell cost, let's talk about profitability of this tank, because I do like to address that. It is a premium at the end of the day. So if you're playing it, you probably want credits. It's not great at making credits. I really, like, you don't feel like you need to load that many gold rounds, especially in a good matchup. If you're in a tier 7 matchup, like, people are fucking scared of you. Like, you can 2-shot tanks. I mean, if you go against tier 6s, good lord, those guys are going to be crying and running away from you, because you can almost 1-shot their entire tank. If you load HE, you can 1-shot their entire tank sometimes. It's pretty scary at those low tiers. And since you do have such good regular rounds, it's just this thing doesn't deal a lot of damage because the DPM's so low, and because it kind of goes to a position and holds that position. And that's why I ended up winning so many of my games. I went to a position and I was a rock that the enemy just couldn't move. And then they lost because they just couldn't push that flank. And I held back a lot of tanks. And when they peeked me, they tried to make some aggressive plays. They tried to, you know, push against me, peek against me, get some damage on me. Boom, 490 alpha. And then I just hide and wait. You know what I mean? And then 490 alpha. And when they did try and shoot back and they tried to trade shots, side armor is, like, side scraping armor is great on this tank. So you can, I think it can be quite influential, but you don't end up dealing that much damage. So you don't really make crazy credits, but you make good credits because you don't need to fire that many premium rounds. Your tank doesn't really die all that often if you're being influential and winning your games. You just sit back, you camp, and you, well, not camp, but you sit back, you hold enemies back on the front line, and usually survive, honestly. But moving on from that, profitability, good, but not great. I wouldn't play this to make credits, but you will make some decent credits while playing it because you don't really need to shoot many armor piercing rounds. You don't really like die too often if you're winning your games. So you're usually the last one to die, basically, is what I'm trying to say with that aspect. But yeah, so moving on from that, top speed 30. It's limited, and you will feel like a bit more of a slower, sluggish heavy, but mobility kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of things. Its terrain resistances are quite decent. And when you get the field mods and Brothers in Arms and all that stuff, you actually don't feel that slow. And that's also because of the power to weight. For a heavy tank, as heavy as this, 12 power to weight is not bad. Like, it's not like you're going to be ramming shit, don't get me wrong. But this thing weighs a fucking lot. It weighs 80 tons. Like, or 75 tons, sorry. This is a heavy fucking tank. And you have 12 power to weight, which means that you actually are not as slow as you'd think. I'm not going to say you're nimble, but for like a super heavy, you are pretty nimble. Like, you actually don't feel sluggish. I didn't feel like my tank was annoying to control. I wasn't just ripping my hair out trying to get into position. It was slow to get into position, but it really wasn't that bad, and I didn't hate it. So your tank traverse isn't really that bad. Your turret traverse isn't bad at all. Like, it doesn't, like I'm saying, like, this is a super heavy that isn't painful in other aspects. Like, it's like a super heavy that is almost a versatile heavy. Like, it's kind of the cross between a versatile heavy and a super heavy. And that's really what I found enjoyable to play about it. But going on, so yeah, mobility, quite decent, actually. Quite decent for how much it weighs and how much armor it has. I was surprised, and it felt decent. Like, it wasn't frustrating in my opinion, but it is slow, don't get me wrong. Next, gun elevation is perfectly fine. I think I don't remember having any problems with gun elevation. Gun depression, however, this is a rear-mounted tank with 5 degrees of gun depression. If you go to a ridgeline, begin to cry because it is painful. It is not a tank that you take to a ridgeline. It is serviceable in some situations. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you go to a ridgeline, you just instantly die. But you basically, I think the only reason it was serviceable is because I avoided the actual gun depression, like places, locations on the map, like the plague. And when I avoided those, the only times I actually had to use my gun depression was in very off situations. And in those very off situations, they weren't massive hills. If you go to any kind of massive hill, this thing is pain. Yeah, so I already talked about turret traverse, pretty decent. It wasn't slow at all. I felt like it was pretty decent for like a slower heavy tank with a big gun. Gun traverse, fully traversable turret, of course. And nextly, we've got armor. So talking about armor, this is the armor profile you're going to see from the front, right? So obviously this green, nobody's going to be able to hit that. I was never really hit there other than HE. So if you do get HE'd, this is from the front. You can already see some glaring things. Lower plate, pretty, I mean, it's thick. Don't get me wrong. It's thick. Sometimes this little plate down here control people too. If it's angled, it'll be a little bit thicker, 220, right? It control people out. Sometimes you do block a round or two because of that, but don't rely on that. 200 lower plate. This is why I'm saying that tier 6s and 7s are scared of you because they have to load gold to even go through your lower plate. And then you have these cheeks here, which look really thick, but they're about 250, which isn't great. And you might think, oh, well, your top plate's only 250. Yeah, but that's flat on. This is a tank you angle. This isn't a tank you go flat on. That's 270, 280. You know what I mean? Like, people aren't going through that easily unless they're tier 9, tier 10 with gold rounds most of the time. So you actually have full armor against higher tiers. The problem, however, is 1, the cheeks, but I'll show you. 2, this cupola. If I go to visual, this cupola is painful. And it doesn't seem that bad at first glance. You might be like, okay, well, you know, it doesn't seem too bad. You know what I mean? It's kind of big, but you know, it's serviceable, right? You get shot in the cupola a fucking lot. Like like, in my opinion, weak points are something that you need to play a tank to really know how bad they are. This is a huge weak point, and honestly, it's painful because of that. It really sucks to have this weak point on top of the tank. You can try and gun block it. It's not super viable though. I mean, and I'll show you why, but I don't know. This cupola, it really surprised me how bad this was. Like, this is a really painful cupola. I got shot in this so many times. If you're facing an accurate tank, just forget it. Just don't even expose your tank more than just to get one shot. Usually with side scraper, you kind of want to keep your tank out, right? And you don't want to have to hide behind the corner. And that's one thing that really sucked about this tank is that I was like this super heavy side scraper that can't just sit out in the open because this Cupola, it's shot so easily. Like that was really frustrating. Also, as I said, this tank kind of counters itself because it has a 40 millimeter roof, which means that it can overmatch itself. So you can see, and because you can see that the turret face is slanted like this, so it kind of goes up in the back. People can overmatch you if they hit your roof, which kind of sucks. If you're fighting something of a big caliber, like VK and OHO, especially those German VK 100 OPs. Actually, I can check in here. These things tower over you a little bit because this thing's actually quite low to the ground. So they are easily able to overmatch your roof, especially when you come around corners close range on them, right? So they don't even have to hit an accurate shot. They just overmatch the roof of your vehicle. So be very careful of that. But you're going to want to side scrape like this, right? And when you side scrape like this, your tank is pretty fucking scary other than that Cupola. Like, I mean, you imagine the wall is like here, right? Obviously, if your Cupola is on the right side, you can hide it with the wall, and that makes it a bit tankier, right? But this isn't really a weak point, which is a big thing on turreted or like rear mounted tanks. Is usually there's a turret ring in the back here. This isn't really a weak point. I never got shot here, right? People aim for the cheeks and people aim for the Cupola because the reason I got hit in the cheeks is because people loaded gold, and then all of a sudden they just shoot you in the fucking face of your turret and you just get penned, right? And this is with 260. You face higher tier tanks, they just go straight through this. Like this is with their normal rounds, they just go straight through tier 9s, tier 10s. So that's why I'm saying against tier 9s, tier 10s, you have to be a support tank. This thing does not work as a support tank. It's slow, it's cumbersome, right? Not super cumbersome, like I said, but it can't peek out around a corner after a tank shot. And like, say your buddy in front of you, your higher tier heavy, tanks a shot, and then you want to peek out and get a shot in before they reverse. Your gun handling is not great enough to do that. It's not terrible, like I said, but it's not great enough to do that, and you're too slow to do that, right? You won't get back around the corner in time. And if you like expose your armor in any way that isn't the main way to expose your armor, all of a sudden you're not exactly the most armored, right? But if people try and fight you, people underestimate you, you're quite scary because yes, like if you load regular rounds, even with 220, this lower plate, like people have to load gold against you, and people don't really realize that if you use some angling. These tracks are big, they soak shots pretty well, and as you can see, you can even over angle pretty heavy in this tank. And I would say I only over to angle to like here. And then they only can hit this little part here to actually pen you. If they want to go through here, they need 250, 260. So obviously if they're loading gold, but even then, yeah, because it's APCR and it has less normalization, and it's really hard to go through there, right? Like that's really difficult. So the main places that I got shot was one, lower plate. If somebody got my lower plate and they were a smart player, they basically never bounced. They basically just insta-penned every time. It's a hard lower plate to hit, but honestly, I was surprised with how like much I was able to get away with even when my lower plate was exposed. And I think that is because people didn't load gold, and if you only have 200 gold pen or regular pen, which a lot of tanks do at tier 8, then this actually becomes quite a low chance of penning, like less than 50%. And there's this bar at the bottom, which is quite troll. And if it goes into the tracks, boom, that shit's soaked. And if it deviates into the upper hole, boom, that shit's fucking going nowhere fast. You know what I mean? So, it was mainly cheeks, Cupola when I was side scraping. Those are the only two places I got penned, and then overmatched if they had a big enough gun, right? Because obviously they can overmatch with 121 millimeter caliber guns. So actually, even Russian tanks can overmatch your roof. But usually you tower over Russian tanks or Chinese tanks because they're quite small and low to the ground. So that's something to keep in mind. Usually you are above them, so that's not too worrying. But yeah, in terms of the armor, it's quite good, right? And I think that Cupola is the only really issue. So the last thing I'll tell you about the armor, like I said, you kind of want to do something like this. You can over angle a little bit, right? Because your armor is still quite good other than that little bit there. But so you kind of want to angle like this, right? So something like this, right? You can go over the right side of your tank. And I had a lot of success with this. But obviously, the cheeks and the cupola were a big issue. So what I found myself doing is, one, not keeping myself exposed if it was an accurate tank. If it wasn't an accurate tank, I hid my cupola, right? Or if it was an accurate tank, I hid my cupola. If not, then I didn't, right? And I risked the chance that they were going to hit me, because I felt like hiding all the time just wasn't really that impactful. Keeping myself out there and just hitting them every time I reloaded instantly. But what I started to learn to do is to angle my turret kind of like a mouse when I wasn't reloaded, right? So I would do this. And now, all of a sudden, that turret is pretty decent, right? It's going to block those shots. And the Cupola's a little bit harder to hit, right? There's a little bit less angle there, but they can go through there. But they do have to load gold for that too, to be fair. Because that has to go through a little bit of mantlet. So it ends up being, or no, that's just a flat part there. It's got this weird little V at the top. It's kind of strange. But you can see that when you're angling like this, now, because you do want to be careful of this side part, right? You don't want to over angle too much, because as soon as you over angle, the cheek is too bad. So what I would find is that I would put my gun pretty much in the direct middle of my tank again. So I would angle like this, aim, shoot them, and then put my gun pretty much directly in the middle, somewhere around there, right? And then all of a sudden now it would go orange again. You can see the effectiveness of this. It worked, and this is something that I learned to do. If you really want to be super effective in this tank, this is something you're going to have to learn to do, because otherwise those cheeks are just too much of a weak point, and they are going to go through them, right? It's like, yeah, it's only 70%, and it's not the biggest target, but they do go through them, trust me. And that Cupola is massive. So if you are facing an accurate tank, you do want to hide. Like, I was facing Lurvas, I was facing T832s. They sniped that tank every day of the week. Or sniped the Cupola every day of the week. Now, I know I focused on the armor for quite a while. I don't want to review to drag on for too long, but I like my reviews to be very informative, right? If you don't care too much, then skip ahead, put it on 2x speed, whatever you want, right? But I want them to be informative. I want to go over every aspect of the tank and share everything I learned. And I played a lot of games in this tank, so it's going to be a longer one. Next, health. It's actually quite a healthy tank. It's not the most healthy tank, but it's quite healthy. It's quite a healthy heavy tank. It's on the healthier side. I can show you very, very quickly. If you compare this to other heavy tanks, you can see that it's not the healthiest. It doesn't have 1,700. I think that would have been nice to make this thing kind of a scary, super heavy tank. 1,600 though is pretty decent, right? You feel like you have a lot of health, and you're gonna want to run a durability device, because your tracks, you're going to be side scraping. You want your tracks to absorb as many shots as possible. You don't want them to get taken off. You also want to be able to keep your armor as well angled as possible. Use your armor well, so you don't want to get tracked and locked down, right? Especially when enemies are going to be putting 2-3 shots into you for every shot you put into them. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. You don't want to be locked down, right? That's terrifying. So durability is huge on this tank, and so boosting that health points up. I mean, with durability, you boost that thing up to 1,700. I'm pretty sure I get up to 1,800. Yeah, 1,820 health. Quite a healthy heavy tank, right? Definitely in the super heavy category. Engine health. This is a big one, actually. The track health is good. Engine health. The engine is located directly under the lower plate of this tank. Your engine gets knocked out every single time you get shot in the lower plate by a big gun, right? Or if you get shot in the lower plate twice. Your engine gets knocked out constantly in this tank. Don't get set on fire very often, though. Actually, very low chance of fire. But and I don't know what the chance of fire is. It says 15%. It's quite low, honestly. I felt like I never really caught on fire, even though they were shooting my engine all the time. But my engine got knocked out a lot. So keep that in mind. Also, when they shoot this Cupola, your commander dies over and over and over again. So commander dies in the Cupola, engine dies down here very often. I didn't notice any other modules. Fires are pretty uncommon. But yeah, the commander dies a lot in the Cupola, and the engine dies a lot when they shoot in the lower plate. I think that is pretty much it. Camo obviously has none. 380 view range. This is nothing to write home about. 380 is pretty normal for a heavy tank, but that's the thing. It's a super heavy that has normal heavy tank view range, which is nice. Again, this is like a heavy tank that doesn't really sacrifice that much to gain that much armor, right? Like it's and the big gun. Like it gains a big gun, good armor, and doesn't really sacrifice everything. You know what I mean? Like it has other aspects. So that is about it. Going back to the game quickly, I will come back to Tanks GG because I want to show off a couple other things. Going back to the game, in terms of crew loadout, you do have a full 5-man crew, and I'm pretty sure this will be the same for the Panzer Conf 7, which will be 5 crew as well. Yep. I don't think it'll be the same for the mouse though, because I think the mouse has a slightly bigger crew. Yeah, you have 2 loaders, but you can always just get an extra loader for your mouse, so it's quite good for crew training. Pretty good. I'm pretty sure it'll be the same for this tank as well, which is relevant because I'm gonna explain why. So yeah, pretty good crew trainer. Pretty good crew trainer indeed. I'll go over my crew in a second, but lastly on Tanks GG, really I just wanted to jump into the crew real quick. Lastly on Tanks GG, I want to compare this to a tank that you're probably going to find relevant. So there is this tank, the VK4502A. This is a Tech Tree Tier 8 German tank. There is the Tiger as well, but the Tiger really doesn't fit what this tank is. But neither does this tank. This tank is front mounted. It has 8 degrees of gun depression. It's got a decent gun. It's got, you know, more DPM. This tank isn't like this tank at all, honestly. Like, you can't even compare it. There's really not that much you're going to find at tier 8 that really fits what this tank is. The Chrysler is pretty much the closest thing I can think of. But even then, that tank is more about, like, brawling, side-scraping brawling, instead of side-scraping, like, super heavy kind of levels. So, also the Chrysler has kind of better armor, but it's hard to compare it to a Chrysler. It's pretty unique, I would say. But if we take this thing out of the comparison, you can see it's got a lot less armor. I can show the armor real quick. It's not armored, really. I mean, actually, it is quite armored, but and the turret fucking sucks. It's you can't really compare this thing to the VK. It's not a side scraper. You're not meant to side scrape in it. I mean, you can. This thing actually, I think, is a little bit underrated, but I don't think it's fair to compare it to the VK. I don't think it's very, like a comparable tank. The real thing that this thing is basically what it's supposed to be is the tier 9 tech tree, the VK4502B at tier 8. That's basically all it is, right? So you can see you get a little bit of penetration. Your reload goes down a little bit, but you hit with the same gun, right? It's the same caliber gun. It's the same big gun. The accuracy gets slightly better. The gun handling gets massively better. You're still going to probably want to run vert stabs, though. Your gun elevation, you get 3 degrees. You can see how similar it is, though, right? Power to weight gets slightly worse. Your terrain resistances get massively worse. So your top speed goes down. But you're probably going to feel relatively similar in terms of mobility, but definitely slower. Yeah, definitely slower. But you get thicker armor. You also get a lot more hit points. And your view range goes up to 400, which is quite nice. So, but that is a tier 9 tank, to be fair. And if we look at the 3D armor model, yeah, this thing's pretty fucking terrifying, side scraping. So, but this is a tier 9 tank. You do have a Cupola. Lot smaller Cupola, though, right? Yeah, this thing's a fucking monster, honestly. But if they load, you know, premium rounds, they can go through your turret. But this thing is honestly probably got a very similar playstyle. It doesn't look like it sacrifices a crazy amount, but obviously 490 alpha goes down in value, but you get a quicker reload. But 490 alpha goes down in value because you're going up to tier 9. The gun handling gets better, but it's still going to be bad enough that you're going to want to use vert stabs. You can actually upgrade the top speed because it gets an extra field mod. You get a lot better armor, a lot more health. So this thing seems like a very natural progression up from the VK up at tier 9. So if you like the VK, I would say check out this tank for sure. And I might honestly get one of these because at tier 9, this thing looks like it'd be a lot of fun. Now that I know that it, like, I mean, comparing it to the VK, you saw how similar the stats are. The VK feels quite versatile for such a super heavy tank. And this feels like a much more super heavy tank that sacrifices a little bit of the versatility to move up a tier, basically. So a little bit of versatility lost. You go up a tier, which is never a good thing, because obviously you don't want to go up a tier. You'd like to get stronger and stay at the same tier, but that's not how it works, right? So yeah, you basically go up a tier, lose a little bit of versatility, but you gain a lot more super heavy ability, right? You gain the armor, you get the health, right? So, and you get a lot less weak points. So definitely worth checking out the VK4502B, which has the same crew loadout as well, right? So you can just put your crew straight in it. I'm definitely going to try and get my hands on one of these eventually at some point because I do like this tank. Um, so, like I said, going back to the game, let me hide Tanks GG there. I think this tank is, it is a super heavy that is surprisingly consistent and influential, in my opinion. It is consistent and versatile. That's what I would say. It's most super heavies are influential, but it's surprisingly versatile, surprisingly influential, or versatile and consistent. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. It's a super heavy that is surprisingly um, versatile and consistent, but its armor is fallible, and it kind of sucks. And that's the best way I describe this tank. It's a solid B tier tank. The gun is really nice. The armor is nice, but fallible. But it's surprisingly consistent and versatile. So now, closing out statements on field mods and equipment and my loadout, and that will be everything. I swear. I know this is a long video. I want to keep these shorter, but honestly, I just want to get as much info out there as possible for the people who want to listen to all of it, right? So my setup, my main setup that I used in this tank: durability in the durability slot, vert stabs in the firepower slot, gun rammer. Now, you could use a turbo. I really didn't feel like I needed it. With 12 power to weight ratio, and this tank having a 30 mile per hour top speed and decent turret traverse and tank traverse, I really didn't feel like I needed the extra engine power. I really don't feel like I needed the extra mobility if I was going to use this setup, which I use most of the time. This is for going into towns. This is for fighting in towns, which is the majority of what you're going to be doing. But sometimes there's not going to be a town, or sometimes you're bottom tier and you don't want to just go fight on the corners with all the super heavies because you're not going to be that useful, and you'd rather go and be more influential somewhere else. Because, like I said, this tank is surprisingly versatile. You can take it to the other side of the map if you build it correctly. So with this setup, you don't have great view range, and it's not ideal. I take the gun rammer because I feel like a gun rammer, just to bring that DPM up, because you can see I can go up to a 196. I feel like you need it, honestly. Not having the gun rammer feels really lame. The gun handling just with vert stabs is quite good. I put in the firepower slot. I honestly value 3% dispersions over 1.5 reload speed, in my opinion, on pretty much every tank. Just having a more, like, it's just more valuable, like, in terms of weighing them against each other. And the durability vice, like I said, up in that track health, up in your hit points, which are two really important things for this tank. Just super nice, honestly. And you get the repair speed, and when you repair, it fully repairs as well, instead of just half repairs. So definitely worth this durability, definitely worth the vert stabs. And the gun rammer is the only thing I would change in this loadout, because you are going to want a city fighting loadout. That's the main thing this tank's going to be doing. In terms of my consumables, I didn't feel like I needed the premium consumable. I really didn't feel like it did much when I was in cities fighting. It doesn't give view range. Well, it does, but these things aren't useful. I'm going to list off the things that you don't get use out of it if you're just going to be city fighting. View range, camo, like, it ups your crew skills, but, like, I mean, that's camo. It does give repair speed. It does lower your DPM. It does slightly improve your gun handling if you have snapshot and stuff like that. But that's about it. And it's, like, not very valuable, honestly, at the end of the day. Really, like, I just didn't really feel like it was worth it. Just bring the fire extinguisher. It reduces your chance of fire as well. Normal med kit, first aid kit. And then in terms of ammo, I really didn't feel like I ever ran out of ammo, so I brought a nice chunk of HE, nice chunk of APCR, nice chunk of regular rounds, and really never felt like I ran out. So I really didn't feel like I had to be too picky or too selective with my ammo choices there, but so kind of just went with the first ratios I kind of picked out and never needed to change them because I never ran out of ammo, I don't think, in this tank. It just fires so slowly and deals so much damage that by the time you're low on ammo, the game's definitely over, so I wouldn't worry about it. Nextly, my next build that I decided to use, bit of a weird build, this one, and you're probably going to be questioning it, but I actually found this quite useful. So, in this next build, I drop the durability and go with vents, and I drop the gun rammer and go for a turbo. So, this is for when you need to go somewhere else on the map, and you can't just go fight with the heavies, either because maybe you're bottom tier, maybe there isn't a heavy place to go, or maybe there just isn't many corners to side scrape, or you need view range, right? even on my heavies, I like to have a view range set up. I think it lets you win more of your games, and that's what I'm all about, trying to win as many games as possible and be influential in my games. And I feel like you always need a view range setup, even in a super heavy tank. You need something where you get enough view range to actually spot for yourself. Now, this is the main reasoning behind this setup, but also getting that turbo is big, and the one module that I felt like I really couldn't drop was the vert stabs. Does this make the tank less useful in the main situation you want to be using it in? Yes. This is for when you can't use it in that situation, and you have to make adjustments, right? Like Prokhorovka, like, there's a reason I use this setup, right? And I tried using an accuracy device. Without vert stabs, it fucking sucks. I couldn't use an accuracy device. You need vert stabs, in my opinion. It's terrible without them. But the vents increases your accuracy and your view range and a little bit of DPM, so you don't lose as much as you'd think compared to the losing the gun rammer. Then also, I put on chocolate instead of a fire extinguisher because that upgrades your view range, and it upgrades your DPM, and it upgrades your accuracy, so you don't lose as much for losing the gun rammer. And now, 0.33 accuracy on a gun this big. That's not bad. That is not bad. Obviously, that's with the field mod and with Brothers in Arms, but 0.33 accuracy on a gun this big, that is not bad at all. And I really did not feel like I was shooting a big fucking gun like this. I felt like I was shooting like a TD gun, honestly, like something that you're expected to be able to snipe with semi-effectively, right? Like, I really, like, obviously I'm not saying this is a sniper all of a sudden, but it is not bad. And this is what I mean, that this tank is surprisingly versatile. Now, the turbo does put your power to weight up to 12.8 and 34. You're not going to feel that much faster. It's not like you put a turbo on and suddenly you're feeling like you're zooming around the map, but it does help, and it is worth it, in my opinion. That 4 extra kilometers is going to make enough of a difference that you're going to want to have it, right? So I would still recommend it. This setup, I don't use too often, but it's there just for when I need it, right? And I feel like this is the main setup. I use this, I'd say 90% of the time, and then every now and then I'll switch to the other setup where I have decent enough view range, 455 and 3.3 accuracy and 34 miles per hour with a 13 specific power. All of a sudden, this is a heavy tank that has good armor and has a big fucking gun that deals 490 alpha that doesn't really feel like a fish out of water. So with this setup, I felt really versatile, honestly, when I needed to use it. But obviously, this is the setup you want to be using most of the time when you can, because this is putting the tank in its element and doing work with it, right? Inside towns and stuff, side scraping. Next, we're going to talk about field mods. Very simple, in my opinion. I don't think there's really any decisions to make here, to be honest, except for the last one. So first of all, you always take the maintaining speed. Yeah, it reduces your suspension durability. Doesn't matter. You're going to be taking repairs anyways. You're going to be using durability most of the time. So this maintaining speed thing, it increases your acceleration, and it increases your top speed, and it increases your traverse speed. So even though you're losing 5% traverse speed, it's not that bad. So you get traverse speed, acceleration, top speed, and all you lose is 10% suspension durability. Yeah, that is basically a no-brainer. So yeah, first one, not really a question in my opinion. Next one, 3% aiming circle size for 5% aiming speed. Aiming speed is the least valuable gun handling stat by a long shot. So yeah, that's another no-brainer. Really basic. Lastly, view range or stun duration, additional stun duration, view range. It's another no-brainer. There's pretty much no reason to take the stun duration thing. You'd lower your view range by 3%. You could maybe not take either mod, and then you would like not gain 3% view range, but not lose 3% view range. But view range is incredibly important, and I feel like you should always build your tanks to have a scouting build in one, like not a scouting build, but like a setup where you have enough view range to spot for yourself in one of your setups. And finally, this is actually the part where you might have a choice. You need to take mobility or firepower. I took firepower because I knew that I was going to be using this setup 90% of the time. And I feel like if I'm going to be using this setup 90% of the time, it's about opportunity cost, pros and cons. How often am I going to be using that mobility slot? You know what I mean? Well, I only use this build about 10% of the time. So yeah, 10% of the time, I might get a whole extra kilometer out of it and 2.5 engine power. But even when I'm using this build, I can use that 3% dispersion. So I really felt like the firepower is more useful. Like I said, you could put your gun rammer in the firepower slot, but I don't really value 1.5% reload speed. I feel like that's quite low. I'd rather have the 3% dispersion. So yeah, field mods super simple on this tank. I really didn't feel like I needed them, but once I got them, it was nice. Don't get me wrong. You don't really need the second setup. You don't really need any of these things. The view range is probably the only nicest thing, and the accuracy, don't get me wrong. But this thing doesn't really have terrible ground resistances, so it's not like you're going to super feel them. I can double check on that just to make sure. I'm almost certain, though. Yeah, ground resistances is 0.1 and 0.129 on medium. You really don't notice this thing's ground resistances at all, so not really needed to get that either, so all good there. And lastly, talk about the crew. I put Arnie in here, good old Arnie. I was able to get him up to a 6-kill crew, which is actually my highest, but that's because he started with a couple trained. I haven't reset him yet, but I do plan to. In terms of what I put on Arnie, I mean, Eagle Eye, repairs, firefighting, recon, brothers in arms, like, about it. I mean, you basically only need repairs and recon and brothers in arms. After that, 3 skills, you're pretty much good to go. I was just training him up, so don't look at this as any kind of guide or anything. Mentor's pretty much useless. Jack of all trades is pretty much useless because, I mean, even he's the one who gets knocked out all the time, so I wouldn't worry about it. Your commander's going to be the first one dead, so definitely just repairs, recon, brothers in arms, and maybe firefighting if you plan to use that premium consumable, because your engine does get shot a lot, so might be useful. And Eagle Eye's nice. You will be dealing some module damage because it is a big gun, but yeah, you pretty much just want brothers in arms, repairs, and recon. Next, on the gunner, obviously brothers in arms. Snapshot is really nice because the gun handling's not great. Repairs, I'm about to take repairs next. Deadeye, designated target are just little extra things. I would just go brothers in arms, snapshot, repairs. Just those 3 is pretty much all you need. Next, on this guy, brothers in arms, off-road driving, smooth ride, repairs. That's pretty much all you need. Next, I'm going to take preventative maintenance if I can. Yeah, that's about it. Pretty simple skills on all these crew members, honestly. On the radio operator, super simple. Brothers in arms, situational awareness, repairs. After that, he's pretty much done. You just need like a 3 skills there. On the gunner, brothers in arms, repairs, intuition. You really want intuition on this tank because it's got such a long reload. Intuition is amazing. Safe stowage, not really super important. Adrenaline rush is kind of a meme, but I had enough points, so I thought I had enough perks, so why not go for it, right? But yeah, I mean, honestly, with this crew, you need 2 to 3 skills on most of them. I mean, your commander needs 3 skills and you're pretty much competitive. Your gunner needs 3 skills and you're pretty much competitive. Your driver, that one, you kind of need 4. So yeah, so 3, 3, 4, 3, 3. So yeah, like very, very not demanding crew. So very nice. And I do feel like I was able to be quite influential, so I won a lot of games, so it was quite decent for crew training. And like I said, it goes straight into the, it can go straight into the mouse. You just need to have an extra loader. It goes straight into these tanks. So decent crew trainer for sure. But yeah, that is about it. I know it's another long one, but I've played this tank a lot, and I really wanted to get all the information in there. I like this tank. I think that it is a very consistent playstyle. Closing thoughts are definitely, this is a fun tank because I felt like if you like the playstyle, you will like this tank because you will go into every match feeling consistent. I never felt like I knew what I was getting myself in for when I played this tank. I knew that when I clicked that battle button, I knew that as soon as every match, I was gonna feel comfortable, right? Like even if I was out of my element, the tank doesn't feel bad. It just feels you're not in your element. You know what I mean? You're not gonna have a monster game, but you might get some nice 490 damage shots at range. You know what I mean? 0.33 accuracy is not bad at all. You're definitely gonna hit some shots. So yeah, I think this tank is. I usually like to come up with a little bit of a sentence I can easily define, a great way to explain the tank, and I'd say a super heavy that has fallible armor, sadly, and a very nice gun. So a super heavy that has sadly fallible armor, but a very nice gun, and is surprisingly flexible and consistent. I think that's the best way I can sum up this tank. It is actually a fun one, and I definitely, like I said, I'm going to try and get one of these because I think the playstyle will be very, very similar, and it'll just feel better overall, honestly, because it is going to... But it is going to be a tier 9, right? Keep that in mind. So at tier 9, you're going to be a little bit worse off. But yeah, that is pretty much it for this tank. I would rate this B tier, in my opinion. B tier, but a fun tank. I would not rate this bad at all. I really did enjoy playing it, so... But definitely a solid B tier because of the giant Cupola, because of the cheek weakness, because of just not really excelling in any other areas either. It definitely just feels like a B tier, right? With the tanks that were going in nowadays, this thing doesn't really hold up to them in terms of being an A tier tank, and it's definitely nowhere near S tier. But is this bad? No. I would never call this a bad tank, and I think that would be silly too. It has enough versatility and enough threat factor that it's not bad. You're not going to see one on these teams and be like, oh, that's shit. But you might see one on these teams and be like, we'll see what they can do. Because I do think this tank can be played kind of badly. So, I don't know. I think this is a decent B tier tank. And kind of the slogan that I said before, I think sums it up real well. So, yeah, that is going to be it. Sorry for another super long one. I'm going to try and make the future ones a little bit shorter if I can. Maybe make some notes. But, yeah, that is going to be about it. So, if you enjoyed, you can subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos, more tank reviews. Or you can come check out my live stream where I stream pretty much all of my games that I play of World of Tanks over on there at twitch.tv/GamerTie108. So, yeah, that is going to be about it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I do really appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you came out of it with some info. And hopefully you have a good rest of your day. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.